The Ted Bundy case, the killer who fooled everyone. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Case 0360. I'm Martina, and tonight we're diving into one of the most infamous and disturbing criminal cases in American history. A case that continues to shock investigators, psychologists, and the public decades later. A case that challenges one simple question: how could someone who looked so normal be hiding something so dark? This is the story of Ted Bundy, the killer who fooled everyone. Before we begin, please be advised, this episode discusses real-life violent crimes. Viewer discretion is strongly recommended. Let's begin. The man who didn't look like a monster. Ted Bundy did not fit the image most people associate with a serial killer. He was intelligent, charismatic, well-spoken, and to many people who met him, even charming. He didn't appear threatening, he didn't act suspicious, and he often blended into everyday life in a way that made him almost invisible. That is exactly what made him so dangerous. Bundy understood something that most criminals never master. People trust appearances, and he used that to his advantage. Early life and the making of a mystery. Ted Bundy was born in Burlington, Vermont, and raised in Washington State. On the surface, nothing in his early life clearly predicted the horrors that would later follow. But behind the scenes, Bundy's personal history was complicated. He struggled with identity questions, he experienced emotional confusion, and he developed a personality that allowed him to adapt easily to different environments. As he grew older, Bundy became increasingly skilled at presenting himself in ways that made people feel comfortable. Friends described him as intelligent and focused. Teachers noticed his academic potential. And later in college, he became involved in political and social circles. To many people, he looked like someone destined for success, not destruction. The beginning of the crimes. In the early 1970s, young women began disappearing in several U.S. states: Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado. At first, investigators did not immediately connect the cases. There was no clear pattern, no obvious link, and no suspect. But slowly, disturbing similarities began to emerge. The victims were often young women. They were frequently approached in public spaces, and many cases involved deception or manipulation rather than force alone. This made the investigation extremely difficult because the danger did not always look like danger. The method that shocked investigators. One of the most disturbing aspects of Bundy's crimes was his method of approach. He often used trust as a weapon. He would present himself as injured or in need of help, or he would appear friendly and non-threatening. In some cases, he even posed as an authority figure or someone requiring assistance. This psychological manipulation was a key part of his strategy. He did not rely purely on physical force. He relied on trust, and that made him extremely effective at avoiding suspicion in the early stages. The investigation begins to close in. As more cases were reported, law enforcement agencies began working together, patterns started to form, descriptions from witnesses began to overlap. A dark-haired man, confident demeanor, often seen driving different vehicles. One of the most important breakthroughs came when investigators began connecting sightings across different states. A suspect profile began to emerge, And slowly, the name Ted Bundy started appearing in investigative conversations. At first, he was just one of many persons of interest, but that would soon change. Arrest, and the first shock Ted Bundy was eventually arrested during a traffic stop. What followed was a series of dramatic legal developments that captured national attention. Unlike many criminal cases, Bundy's case did not remain hidden in the background. It became a media spectacle, court appearances, escapes, rearrests, and ongoing investigations turned the case into national news. But what shocked people most was not just the crimes, it was Bundy himself. Because even in custody, many people still struggled to believe he could be responsible for such violence. That disbelief became part of his legacy. The psychology of deception. One of the most studied aspects of Ted Bundy's case is psychology. How did he manage to appear so normal? How did he avoid detection for so long? And why did so many people trust him? Experts often point to a combination of traits: high intelligence, strong social skills, emotional control, and an ability to adapt his behavior depending on the situation. Bundy could present himself differently depending on who he was interacting with. To some, he was a friendly student, to others, a political assistant, to others, a confident and attractive young man. This adaptability made him extremely difficult to read, and in many ways, that is what allowed him to operate undetected for years. The trial that captivated America, Bundy's trials, became some of the most publicized legal proceedings of the era. Courtrooms were filled, media coverage was constant, and public interest reached extraordinary levels. People were fascinated not only by the crimes, but by the personality of the accused. Bundy often represented himself in court, a rare and controversial decision. He used legal knowledge to challenge procedures, and he remained highly active in his own defense. For many observers, it felt like watching a psychological battle unfold in real time, the confession that changed everything. Eventually, Bundy's legal strategies began to collapse. Evidence mounted, witness testimony strengthened, and pressure increased. In a series of confessions, Bundy admitted responsibility for multiple crimes. The scale of what he revealed shocked even experienced investigators. The details confirmed what many had feared. This was not a single isolated incident. It was a pattern of repeated violence over years. The confession removed any remaining doubt. Ted Bundy was not misunderstood. He was responsible. The final verdict, Bundy, was ultimately convicted and sentenced to death. His final years were spent on death row. Even then, public fascination did not fade. People continued analyzing his behavior. Psychologists studied his interviews, and documentaries attempted to understand how such a case could happen. In 1989, Ted Bundy was executed in Florida, but the case did not end there, because the questions it raised remain. Why the case still haunts America? The Ted Bundy case continues to attract attention for several reasons. First, the contrast. He did not fit the expected image of a criminal. Second, the manipulation. He used trust as a tool. Third, the scale. The number of victims and states involved created nationwide impact. And fourth, the psychological complexity. People still try to understand how deception on that level is possible. The case changed how law enforcement studies behavioral patterns. It also changed public awareness about personal safety and trust. but most importantly, it reminded the world that appearances can be deeply misleading. The victims matter. Most while Ted Bundy's name is widely known, it is important to remember the victims. They were young women with futures, families, and dreams. Their lives were cut short in ways that cannot be fully understood or justified. Behind every headline is a human story, and those stories deserve to be remembered with respect. Final thoughts. The Ted Bundy case is not just a story about crime, it is a story about perception, about trust, and about how easily appearances can deceive. Even decades later, it remains one of the most studied criminal cases in American history, not because of fascination alone, but because of the warning it leaves behind. Sometimes danger does not look like danger. Sometimes it looks ordinary, and that is what makes it unforgettable. Thank you for watching Case 0360. I'm Martina. If you found this episode insightful, make sure to subscribe for more true crime documentaries and real-life case breakdowns. And as always, stay aware, stay safe, and never trust appearances too quickly. We'll see you in the next case.